welcome back to Oops, the Orgasm Oracle podcast show. Today, I'm super excited for this episode called Purity to Sovereignty. And we're going to talk all about purity culture, which I know nothing about from my upbringing. But I know it heavily influences the culture I grew up in and the culture of North America. So I'm so interested in this topic and how it like interwebs with kind of my upbringing. And then I have this special guest here, Rachel, who is a sister of mine we met in this women's empowerment group that has a focus in healing through sexuality and healing our sacred sexuality and reclaiming it and changing our relationship to power. And yeah, I'm super excited for today. So thank you so much, Rachel, for being here. And yeah, Rachel, who are you? Like, what makes you you? Draw us a picture for those just listening and not viewing this on YouTube. So yeah, introduce yourself. Thanks for coming.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Nadia. So, yeah, I'm Rachel. I grew up in a small city in rural Alberta. So, very white town. I myself am white, cis women. My pronouns are she, her. And yeah, I'm a middle child. I'm recently coming into my identity being bisexual. So, that's kind of a newer thing for me that we can like touch on later if you want.
Yes.
Yeah, I grew up going to Catholic school, going to church with my parents, and then eventually I went on to go to Christian university. So just very heavily influenced by going to youth group, listening to Christian music, like all the kind of Christian culture stuff. Like it kind of feels like a different world in some way if you don't know, if you've never gone to church or like experienced some of those things. So I think that's kind of why you wanted to have me on here, because we were like DMing and you're like, what? Like, what is this that you're like talking about, and like how you were raised and stuff. So yeah, I live in Vancouver now and I'm a birth worker here. So I left a lot of that life behind in Alberta. And so just here to talk about my journey and whatever questions you have for me.
I love it. I love it. So it's funny because we're both from Alberta, right?
Yeah.
So I'm from Calgary and you're from a little more north than here.
Yeah.
And my mom grew up in, I think, Christianity, and she hated it. It like really traumatized her. Obviously, she doesn't really talk much about it, but she just like hates it. She's the super atheist and super into science. And so we were kind of raised that way, but like it was really cool because my parents also let me explore. Like I had friends of every religion, every color of skin, everything. Like Calgary is actually, you wouldn't expect it, but it is pretty diverse. And especially I just loved meeting friends of different cultures because I just got to like be immersed in their different holidays and experiences. And my upbringing was very just like, kind of vanilla and just plain, like we celebrated Christmas, but it didn't have any religious connotation. And my like first like image of religion was two things. One was my granddad said he goes to church still only because he wants a place to be buried. So he just kept going to church so he could get in the cemetery by my grandmother. And then the other one was, I remember in elementary, my friend invited me to church because I guess this is a thing. Like you like try to invite the other kids to church because they want to like recruit people. So I remember my mom had a really struggle, like, oh, should I let her go? Like, I really don't like this part of culture and this kind of thing. And I had no idea. I was just kind of like, why wouldn't my mom let me go in somewhere? Because she let me do whatever I wanted and explore. So I remember going and I was like so weirded out. I was like, what are these songs? What is happening? And I remember my friend, she was so like aggressively inviting me and like super excited because I think it's like also really praised when you like bring someone else in or something.
Yeah.
I was just like, this is so weird. So I remember never going back, but I'm glad I kind of got that experience. And then all my other experience was a bit indirect, or like I've been to Rome, and I remember I was there with my mom and she was just like swearing the whole time. She's like, this is so stupid. All this gold should be going to poor people. And then, which makes sense to me.
Yeah.
So yeah, I would love to just hear about like, I don't know, what are your earliest memories of religion? Like, was it not just on Sundays? Was it like an everyday part of your life? Was there like scriptures in your house, as I like see some people, like what was it like?
Um, yeah, so it was definitely like church every Sunday and then going to like Sunday school. So when you're really little, it's like stories about like more kid friendly stories, which really aren't kid friendly if you actually read
Yeah.
them. Like Noah and the Ark and everyone dies, but that's
Yeah.
like what they teach you as a kid with like hand puppets and stuff. So yeah, I did that. And then my parents, actually my mom used to work at a Bible college and my parents met at Bible college. So that was very
Wow.
much like a part of their story and their love story coming together. So I was around a lot of people in like their early 20s who used to like babysit me from the Bible college. And my dad ended up going to back to school when I was like a teenager.
Hmm.
So he was going to school there to get his like theology degree. And yeah, we used to have what's called like small group. So it's like a Bible study kind of thing where adults and stuff would come to our house and have like a Bible study thing, and then us kids would go off, and I don't even remember what we did. But it was very much like a part of our kind of daily lives, I guess you could say. And
Hmm.
like I said,
Like,
I
did
went
you
to
like
Catholic.
pray at dinner?
Yeah, we did. Yeah,
Hmm. Hmm.
I would say like my parents still do. Yeah, when I'm home, we like all sit
Yeah.
down to the dinner table together and pray before a meal and
Yeah, and
stuff
it's
like
funny
that.
because
So
I learned that also like recently about like just blessing our food and the elements that went into it, not
mhm.
necessarily God. And I remember I was at a retreat and I was doing that, and one girl was so triggered because her family did that in a religious way, and it just
Yeah,
like triggered the shit out of her.
for sure.
Um, yeah. So it was a part of your everyday life, like,
Yeah, yeah, I would say so.
yeah.
Yeah, listening to Christian music,
Oh
Christian
yeah, music.
radio.
And so this whole idea around purity culture, how does that play in from childhood? And does it like, does the Bible stories kind of evolve as you get older? Like they get more like, as they are in the Bible, pretty graphic and such. And this also purity culture, like, does it start at childhood?
I would say it definitely does. Like, so obviously we have kind of like the overt cultural message that we're given, like very specifically, we were told like don't have sex until you're married and things like that. But then there's also just kind of more subtle ways that we were trained, even from like very young age, in or like steeped in this kind of idea of purity culture. So I guess to like give some people some context if they're not as religious, like the idea of like
Mhm.
being pure. So like I said, waiting till you're married to have sex and only having the one partner. And it was very like heteronormative. Like the idea of being queer was like not like
Existent.
there really. Yeah.
Mm.
And also, but you also have to be pure like in your thoughts really, because there's some verse in the Bible where um, I think it's Jesus. Maybe it's someone else. I'm pretty sure it's Jesus though. That's like, oh, if you even like look at a woman with lust, then you're sinning. So it's not just about specifically the acts of not doing it, but it's also about like purity of thoughts in your mind. And for women, it was obviously a lot more like pressure because we had to like dress more like covered up because there's this
Mm.
idea that we like shouldn't make men stumble, which is obviously bullshit. Maybe
Mhm.
not obviously, but like to me now it's obvious. Um, because it was really like we had to take on that responsibility for someone else to kind of um, dress a certain way so that we weren't causing another person to sin,
Mm.
um, or like making them have impure thoughts or whatever it is, or leading them into temptation or whatever those like a lot of like Christianese kind of phrases that you might hear. um,
And
So
the men were
yeah.
kind of taught, like, if they're having an impure thought, it's not necessarily from their own autonomy. It could be from a woman specifically.
Yeah, kind of. So I know, like, sometimes, like, especially once you become a teenager, they kind of split you up lots of times when it comes to Bible study or different group things. And so, like, the girls would go off and talk about stuff, the guys would go off and talk about stuff. But I had lots of guy friends. So they told me, like, oh, they were having like a purity talk. And one of the pastors told them, well, every man struggles with porn. It was like kind of just like like assumed that all men watch porn.
Mm,
And
mm,
he then thought he was like weird because he didn't watch porn. So then he
mm.
became curious about it and like went onto the internet and found it. But that was never a message that I would ever heard. Like, I was never in a room with a bunch of women and been like, well, let's just assume that all women watch porn. Like, it wasn't like that at all. It was definitely very like gender norms in a lot of sense. Like, there's this expectation that like men are just these lustful beings that can't control it and are more like almost Neanderthal like, and that
Mm.
are like somehow more evolved and have to be like controlling of their body for both themselves and for men.
So women are somehow more evolved, but they don't have the power still. Like, was there big like
Yeah,
power dynamics at play, and it was the men were in power?
for sure. Like, it kind of depended, but like I personally went to a church where like women are allowed to be pastors. Like, ooh, super
Mm,
revolutionary.
mm.
But honestly, at that time, it was like, again, I went to Catholic school. Only males are allowed to be priests. Um, so the church I went to, which like I thought was more progressive, they were allowed to have female pastors, but we also just didn't have female pastors. So it was one of these things that's like, yeah, women are equal, but also in practice, it wasn't
Mm.
like we saw that, or at least I never did at the church I went to. But there are certain kind of debates among Christianity about, are women kind of equal role, or do they like have to like submit to their husbands?
Yeah.
Um, in kind of the men being the leader or like the spiritual leader of their house. So I would say for the most part, men are kind of seen as above women in a lot of ways, but specifically in like the spiritual kind of way.
Yeah, and now I'm just thinking, I have so many thoughts here.
Yeah.
So, like, I lived in the Middle East for 5 years. I lived in
Yeah.
Israel, Palestine, and then other places in the Middle East. But like, Jerusalem is like the hub of these monolithic religions, and
Mhm.
it's very interesting, like in Islam as well as Judaism, where like the men are the ones who actually have to pray like a lot more than the women.
Mhm.
The women actually don't have as much like spiritual responsibility per se, but they're also like controlled. So it's interesting because like,
Yeah.
men who don't want to be religious, like they have more religious responsibility, but a lot of them don't want to be in that responsibility. And that's always what I
Mhm.
say in patriarchy as well, is like it doesn't benefit the man either, because like they don't get to choose their authentic role either. They have a forced
Yeah.
role as well, and they might have like the better role, but it's still like they have this more responsibility. And I'm never sure, like, in Christianity, like, is that really the case? Because I know like priests, there's more kind of priests, and especially like nuns aren't like the preachers and like leaders of the church, as far as I
Yeah.
understand. But so would you say like men also have like more of a religious responsibility versus women?
Um, yeah, I would say for the most part. And again, like, Christianity is so like something that we don't talk about. It's very much like a tribal religion in the sense that it's so specific to whatever culture it's in. And there's so
Mm,
many different like variations of it, whether it's like
mm-hmm.
evangelical Christianity or like more Calvinism, Catholicism, like Lutheran, like that's all can be very specific to like the denominations, but also the country you're talking about, and how people actually practice religion and how serious they take it in those countries. So yeah, but I would say, yeah, for the most part, like men would have more of the responsibility, like spiritually speaking.
And they're probably like closer to God, therefore, or whatever, right?
Yeah, I don't know.
Yeah, and I mean, just the fact that Jesus is a man, right? Like it is
Yeah,
kind of based off of that, right?
yeah,
And then Mary is a virgin. Like,
Yeah.
what?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah. And that
so
was like,
interesting.
that was the woman's role, is being a virgin. Like,
Yeah, I guess so. Yeah, is that kind of what it's attached to, is like the virginity of Mary? Like, this is like this connection.
I think that's part of it. That's seen as like the most spiritual, holy thing that like she did in the Bible. And then that we kind of took that and ran with it and said, like, this is like the standard in a way. Um, but like I said, it's very like contextual for the culture. So I feel
Yeah,
like like this idea that we have of purity culture, it was kind of like a little bit newer. It's and I mean, I personally think it's just obviously comes down to like controlling women specifically, but also anybody
mm,
in the religion. Like we um in school we were like given like purity pledges. So it's like signing this little thing saying, I'm going to wait till I'm married to have sex. And then I think it was kind of like the 80s and 90s where like this kind of true love waits movement came about. So it's like almost like
true love
commercializing.
waits.
Yeah,
Okay,
it's
I
called
haven't
True
heard
Love
of this.
Waits.
As
So it's
far
kind
as
of
I know
this,
about purity rings is the Jonas
yeah.
Brothers. Okay, that's as much as
Yeah,
I
so I
know.
was gonna say it's like almost like the commercialization of purity. So it's like buying a
Interesting.
purity ring, and then there's all these books that came out on sexual purity that we were being sold to like teenagers, and it was, um, yeah, just I don't know. It's like very, I don't know. It's very strange to think about that and kind of even how that came about. And
It's so
um,
interesting because, like, I'm guessing the wedding ring like came from Christianity. Probably. Have you heard that? Or
I would assume so. I'm
but
not
that's
really
what
sure.
it's like derived off of too, right?
Yeah,
It's like
yeah.
are you married to God, or are you married to
Not
yourself?
Not necessarily. It's more just like a visual symbol. So like I used to have a purity ring. It literally just said purity on it. Or you can buy one that says true love waits or whatever, and you wear it on your wedding ring finger.
On the wedding ring finger.
And
True love
yeah,
waits.
yeah.
Wow.
And then people can like see that and see that you're wearing a ring and then see what it says or ask about it. And again, it kind of goes back to what you're saying with your friend kind of taking you to church. Like your friend who's not religious might see that and be like, oh, why are you wearing a wedding ring? And then you're like, oh, actually, because I'm saving myself till marriage or whatever.
And you should too.
Yeah, exactly. Kind of, yeah.
Wow, it's so fascinating to me. And so the idea too, like, what was sex ed like? Did you have sex ed? Because one of my memories too is, so when I was really struggling, I think it was in junior high, and I wanted to go from the French program to the English program. They almost kicked me out of my school because it wasn't in my district, and it was only in the district for French because there's less French schools. And so we were looking at different schools, and I remember my mom and I found this like casual private school, and
Mhm.
like you could wear your own clothes and whatever. And then we're like reading about it, and then it was just like, oh, in science class, like we teach that like God created everything, but we also teach da 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 or whatever. And my mom was like, no way, you're not going here. Like, that's crazy. So like, was science like, sex ed is one thing, but like, what was even
Mhm.
your biology classes like? Were they like, no, Adam and Eve and, you know?
Yeah, so for people that don't know, like Catholic school in Alberta specifically is government funded. So it's basically like public school, but there's a religious aspect to it. And you
Okay.
have to take a religion class once a week. And all our teachers that taught there had to be Catholic, like basic, like gone through the church process of becoming Catholic.
Okay.
So I didn't really have sex ed. Like one of my teachers who's supposed to teach us sex ed was just like, yeah, like learn from your own experiences and
Whoa. Learn from your
like
own experiences, but don't have any experiences.
kind of. So I think that like a lot of the teachers were like realistic and like they know that like teenagers are going to have sex, so they're kind of just like, yeah, learn from
Okay.
your own experiences. And literally my teacher was like, oh, let's go outside and play baseball. And instead of having a sex ed class, he took us outside and we played sports. And it's
Well,
like,
you learn the three
so
bases.
yeah, like it was awful looking back. But
Wow.
the other sex ed class I remember doing was they brought a special person in, sex ed teacher, but it wasn't sex ed. It was just like, this is an STI talk,
Mm.
kind of like scaring us away from having sex in a sense, because they were just showing us these really brutal pictures of genitalia with
Oh my
STIs,
God.
infections, and not really explaining that you should be safe and wear a condom and get tested, just being like, this is what gonorrhea looks like if it's out of control or whatever. And
Hmm.
then having these little stickers on, like, they put it on like every fourth desk and being like, 1 in 4 people get an STI or whatever it is, whatever. I don't even know what the statistics were at the time, but basically
Yeah.
kind of like, it's a very shame based, like,
Mm. Even
sex
from the
ed.
outside person, not
I
from.
think this person was Catholic as well, though.
Oh,
I
okay.
can't
Well
remember
then.
if they were like, yeah, I can't remember exactly. But yeah, for sure. And as far as science goes, I don't really remember there being too much of a religious slant to that. Because, like I said, it was kind of like public Catholic school. Um, but also when I was growing up, like, I was taught evolution like as a theory, and it was like a big emphasis on theory. Like, oh, this is just theory. So this is
Interesting.
what we think, but like it might not be real, kind of thing. I was never really taught creationism, I don't think, in like a hardcore way, the way that some Christians are.
Interesting. Yeah, because I think
Yeah.
like mine, they didn't talk about like theory or not. They
Yeah.
just talk about it. And
Yeah.
I guess because like I went to public school, right? And it without domination, is that the word?
No, denomination. Yeah. Yeah.
Denomination. Yeah.
Denomination. Yeah.
Yeah. um Domination. So they the idea was just kind of like a blank slate. Like they're not telling
Yeah.
you like this is the way it is. They're just, I don't know, just giving you the books and you kind of just
Yeah.
read it. Like it's not about
Yeah.
anyone's opinion at that point. It's just,
Right. Yeah.
yeah, interest, like math. It's just kind of like, oh, it is,
Fact. Yeah.
yeah. Yeah, interesting. And I mean, like, because I started sex ed in grade, was it 5 or no, I think it was grade 5. Oh yeah, it must for
Mhm.
sure grade 5, maybe even earlier actually. Maybe it was grade 4 because I do remember like I think it was grade 3, 4. We were like in classes together and the grade 4s had to go off and we didn't have that class. And then I think it started grade 4. And I remember too, my earliest memory of like a specific sex ed thing is like I remember the teacher like made this kind of circle because he liked to change the desks all around all the time. It was like, I don't know, his thing. And I remember I hated having a male teacher. I found it so weird and awkward. And then he had to teach us sex ed and like, it's just so bad.
Yeah.
And I remember I had this kid sitting beside me and the teacher was talking about penis sizes. And he was just like, the penis should be like this size at this age or something like this. Like this is what's normal or something. And then the kid beside me like pulls out his ruler and like sticks it down his pants
Oh my
and starts like
God.
measuring his penis right beside me. I was like, this is so traumatizing.
Yeah.
Oh
Oh my
my
goodness.
God. So like in public right there, you just like had to like find
Yeah.
out. So yeah, and then but I remember like mine wasn't terrible, but it wasn't good. Like it wasn't good, like
Mhm.
that's something I talk about in like my sex coaching stuff too, is like one time I was talking to my teacher and like I was like, well, I was never like traumatized about sex. Like I wasn't told like, don't do it, like you're gonna die. It was more just like I had no like good examples around it. Like,
Yeah.
and so therefore I had to go and seek my own, right? And
Yeah.
so you guys were like shamed, but you
Yeah.
talked about one story about how it like would make someone curious. Therefore, did you feel
Yeah.
that personally? Like you were curious about it, but like you were shamed about it? Like how did it feel, this kind of polarity inside?
For sure. I felt very like curious. And I remember like being in Bible college and me and my friends were like, well, what does a circumcised penis actually look like? Or what does an uncircumcised penis look like? Like there was just like, I grew up mostly in like junior high, like without the internet. And then slowly we
Mhm.
were getting it more and more, like by the time I was in high school. So by the time I was like in my early 20s, I was like, oh, we can actually like Google these things and find out, like, because there was just a lot of like questions around like what actually happens when you have sex. I don't really remember when I learned about sex, but I think it was just like watching TV and kind of like absorbing things from TV shows and being like, oh, okay, that's what sex is or whatever. And obviously, you know, like the way media portrays sex isn't necessarily realistic.
Yeah.
So I remember just
No.
like having conversations with my friends being like, well, what is this thing and that thing? And yeah, just like, no, um, yeah, not necessarily knowing where to go for that information. So we would kind of just talk to each other, but all of us were pretty clueless as well, because
Mm-hmm.
if we're also like grew up in kind of that Christian culture without proper sex ed. And then eventually I got to the point where I was like watching a lot of YouTube videos and then started reading books about things. But yeah, for sure it was just like I don't even know how I learned some of the things that I know about sex. I really just I'm just like I feel like no one taught me anything, you know.
Yeah. Yeah. And so do you remember like one of the first of your friends who like had sex? Like did someone like report back, or was everyone like secretive of it and you knew people were
Oh,
doing it, or
totally secretive, totally
okay.
secretive. So it was
Okay.
this thing where it was like I had a lot of friends, and like my friend group from like youth group, church kind of overlapped with my friend group from school. So we were like a lot of the same people. And a lot of them grew up on the same block as me, like just very small town. And then it was all of us like, oh, we'll wait till we're married to have sex. Obviously, some of us were, you could tell we were like more into it than other people. And then
Mm.
eventually, my friends who had been together for a really long time, she was like super Catholic. She had like 7 older sisters and brothers, and was like, oh, my goal in life is to be the first one of my siblings to actually be married when I have sex. Like that was her big thing.
Oh, okay.
Because all of them had had sex before they were married, and like she saw
Okay.
that as a bad thing. So her goal was to wait until she was married. And then she eventually broke up with this guy, and then like I found out a few months later that it's because like they had started having sex, and she felt so like guilty about it that she just decided that like God told them to break up or whatever it was. So
Wow.
it was, yeah, things like that would happen in my friend group. And then I eventually found out that some other friends of mine were having sex. And again, it was like one of those things that like I don't think they were ashamed about it as much because they didn't break up, but I was never told about it, like
Mm.
because they were just like worried that I was going to judge them. And it was just very much this like secretive, like, oh, we're doing this now, but we're not like telling our other friends, especially the ones that are more religious or who might care or judge us or shame us or whatever. Like very, very judgment based
Yeah,
friendship group.
that's interesting because I would say that's exactly my experience. It had nothing to do with God, but
Mm.
in general, like we were shamed, and people were kind of lying and quiet about it and accusing other people. And yeah, I remember it was so shameful. It was really
Yeah.
shameful. And therefore it took away a lot of the safety around it, and then the pleasure, right? Like, I mean, we
Mm-hmm.
were never taught about pleasure or consent or anything. Like, I
No, no.
only kind of had a revelation of consent like a couple years ago, and like what that really is to me, and I'm still figuring that out.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, I mean, I was very lucky in my first sexual experience. Like, it was with this boyfriend that I loved, and it was like we had no fucking clue what we were doing, but it was like kind of this natural situation. And he like checked in on me during, and like he really, really cared about me. And like I was really lucky, but it wasn't like, oh, like, did you orgasm? Because I don't
Mm-hmm.
even think I knew that word for like a long time. Like,
Yeah.
and I didn't understand like even what it was or anything like that. So can you talk on, pleasure and how maybe your personal discovery of pleasure, and was things immediately pleasurable for you, and maybe even self pleasure? Because I was self pleasuring before I had sex for sure. Well,
Yeah.
now I got to think about it. I think I was, but definitely with a partner, I didn't like have the experiences I had self pleasuring. I mean, still I don't, honestly.
Yeah.
Like I fuck myself better than anyone can fuck me. So like, what about you? Like, did self pleasure come first, or was that like a huge no?
So it was one of those things that was like kind of like a debated topic within like the Christian circles I was in, it was like, is
Mm,
masturbation a sin or not?
mm,
And it
mhm,
definitely was more along the lines of like, this is a sin, because like I
mhm.
said, like, even if you're thinking about lust, or you're like picturing a woman naked or whatever, and you're pleasuring yourself, I'm thinking more in the context of guys, because
Like,
they
could you
assume that
not
guys,
think of someone naked and pleasure yourself, and then it
exactly,
would be
like,
okay?
so
Like,
uh maybe in theory, but I think that's kind of what I was taught, was just like, well, this is kind of a gray area, and so you kind of should err on
mm,
the side of like
caution.
being
Yeah.
purer, so you should just not do it, you should just stray away from it. But yeah, for me, it was definitely like not until I was older that I was actually like, okay, I'm just like curious about this. I'm just gonna like, never really looked at my vulva at all, or like my pussy. I was just like this very much like disembodied like
Mhm. Mhm.
experience of like, yeah, feeling kind of like gross or bad or whatever,
Yeah.
like touching yourself or looking at it even. But then eventually I just started just doing it out of curiosity, just like, what does my vulva actually look like? And like,
Mm.
I'm just gonna like stick my fingers in there and see what that feels like. And then yeah, and then actually just like, trying to masturbate. Like, it wasn't until I was probably like 22, like early 20s, that I was actually like started to masturbate and was like,
Mm.
okay, I'm gonna see what this is. And then I'm pretty sure I like looked it up on the internet, being like, where is your clit? And then actually like
Yeah.
looked in the mirror, being like, okay, like,
It's
let's
that.
connect the dots here. Yeah.
Yeah, I don't
And
think I
yeah,
did that. I think I just eventually got a vibrator because I had a fake ID, and I bought a vibrator with a fake ID. And I was just like, this, I know this spot feels good. So
yeah,
therefore, yeah.
yeah, yeah. But I specifically remember looking in the mirror, and then I remember being in like university at the time, basically just like obsessively doing it, basically because it's like you're a teenager, because you're
Yeah,
like
as
just
soon as you
discovering
learn
this
it, like you
thing.
obsessively do it. That's the
Yeah, because
thing.
I'm just like, how do I orgasm? Like, what is an orgasm? All that stuff. So then I would just go and like nap all the time when I was studying, and then
And were
I was
you at school, or were you at home then, or did you live like on
I lived in
campus?
dorms, yeah, on
Okay.
campus, and I was going to like Christian university, yeah. And
Okay.
then so I would just go and nap a lot, and just like, sometimes I would sleep, but sometimes I wasn't sleeping,
Or sometimes sometimes I do it like to take a nap. Like,
Exactly, yeah.
yeah. Yeah.
So, especially when my roommate wasn't gone. I mean, when my roommate was gone,
Yeah,
then
yeah.
it's just like discovery, and then yeah, trying to figure out how to have an orgasm, what that even was, was part of it too.
And did you like feel a lot of guilt doing that, or did
Absolutely, yeah,
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 and it wasn't like
yeah.
the pleasure overtook it. It was, were you like every time trying not to do it but still like,
It was kind of like, so I don't know if you know about this, but like there's this Christian thing called like Lent. So it's like before
yeah.
Easter. It's like 40 days before Easter.
Mhm.
And it's not as much like a mainstream Christian thing. It's more of a Catholic thing.
Okay.
But it is kind of like a sacred kind of holy time.
It's
So
like
lots of times,
Ramadan.
kind of, yeah. So lots of Catholic people give up like eating meat, things like that. So
Mhm.
this
Mhm.
idea that I grew up with, like, oh, you give up something for Lent. Like sometimes it's like chocolate or whatever. So the first year I learned to masturbate, I was like, I'm gonna give up masturbating for Lent.
And did you? Were you
No, I
successful?
just failed at it. Like, I was just, because I did feel guilty about it. I was like, okay, maybe I should stop doing this. But also at the same time, it was like, this feels really good.
Mhm.
And
It's so
so,
conflicting.
yeah. And I'd already had the experiences in my life previous to that where I was like, oh, I was told like I shouldn't drink or shouldn't get drunk or whatever. But then I just did a few times just because I wanted to and it felt good and all my friends were doing it. So then it kind of just became like that too. It's just like, well, is this really as bad as what people say?
Mm.
And also, I was starting to feel like there's so many aspects of Christianity that were very hypocritical and kind of like,
Mm.
why is this like we can do this thing, but we can't do that thing? And feeling so much shame about it. And when Jesus preaches love, and that's his big message, why is it that we're interpreting it as like such a shame based religion? So I was starting to kind of like uncover my own ideas about religion and what that even meant in my life. So I think I was just kind of like slowly just being like, yeah, I don't actually believe this. I don't actually want to like adhere to
Mm.
this or that or whatever. Like I'm gonna kind of just do what I want to do. And
Yeah, it's
one of those
so
things where it's masturbate.
interesting. Yeah. Yeah. It's so interesting because I can relate like in different ways,
Yeah.
but specifically like with guilt and shame, like those are not two things I struggle with when it comes to sex. I mean,
Yeah.
shame specifically, like I'm really lucky that I don't struggle with that. Like
Mhm.
I know a lot of people who really, really do. And it's not my specific thing. I've always been quite shameless when it comes to sex. Like I
Mhm.
remember in high school sex ed class, like no one wanted to ask their questions because they were so shamed. And
Yeah.
so they would ask me, and then I would raise my hand for them. And I remember like guys would be like, oh, she's like curious about sex. I'm like, yeah, well, like you don't know anything about sex. So like, you know, like I would just snap back and I just had no shame around it. And it was interesting because therefore I got like bullied and shamed, right? Like people would try to shit on me because I had no shame around sex. So it's this weird thing where like if you have shame around sex, you're like kind of better in a way, but like you are shamed, you feel ashamed, but then if you don't feel ashamed, you get like shit on for it. So it's this like weird dichotomy and
Yeah.
hypocriticism, and I guess it's from religion, right? Like
Yeah.
I think before religion people weren't like shaming around sex. And I mean, like I always say, like personally, so I'm really curious about your opinion on this next piece, because like I don't like to like go and blame religion right away, because I find it's
Mhm.
more like the cultural, like patriarchy, agricultural control thing, like took religion as a way to like control and shame people and fear people and therefore control them. Like I don't think Jesus was going around telling people like not to have sex and such. And I mean, I even make jokes where like I think Jesus's religious experiences were wild sex, and that was his connection to God.
Yeah.
And I mean, in Tantra, that's kind of the background of it, is like these depictions of like Hindu gods and stuff are like female orgasm, which are like very wild and crazy. And
Mhm.
like, this is maybe a dumb question, but I thought in the Bible, like it's all like John and Peter and whoever else. Like is there like Jesus and then like his scripture specifically, or is it just like
So
interpreted by people?
yeah, so it's like the four major gospels, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, are the story of Jesus, but um only two of them were actually written by his disciples. The other ones were like written by people later on. And I mean, I could
But
go
even
through
his
this, but yeah.
disciples, like how do we know, right?
Yeah, for sure. It's like, quote, Jesus said this thing, but there's this whole it's not even a theory necessarily, it's kind of a theory, but like this idea that like even the text they got that from, there's commonalities in it. So they believe that there's this like Q gospel that we haven't found yet, but that exists somewhere, that's like the original gospel
Mm,
that basically from an archaeological standpoint we kind of know it exists, but like we haven't found it.
mm.
So it's kind of like this source of the writing that came earlier. But
And the one that came earlier, you think is direct from Jesus's mouth?
not necessarily. I think the
Okay.
gospels are somewhere like 30-ish years after Jesus
30
was
years
alive
after Jesus died.
that it was written. I
Okay.
think I could be
Wow.
kind of misremembering that, but as far as historical text goes, that's actually like pretty close
Yeah.
age-wise, because like what we know about like Alexander the Great comes from like hundreds of years
Yeah.
actually after
Yeah.
he was
How
alive.
fucked is that?
So if you're talking about what Jesus said, obviously it's your interpretation as a human, because like writing wasn't as prevalent back then, and
Hmm.
eventually someone wrote it down. It was mostly oral stories that got
Yeah.
passed down, and then
Totally.
eventually someone decided to write it down, and then his
But is it not like telephone at that
followers.
point? 30 years of
Yeah,
telephone,
for
right?
sure. And then his followers, specifically Peter was a big one that wrote a lot of the other books of the Bible. They were like his letters to different churches, and they were very much contextualized of like the what the church was doing at the time and what Peter decided that these churches should and shouldn't be doing. Like one of them was like women wearing head covering and how
Hmm.
they should be doing that and stuff. And like
So that
Christianity
was
has
Peter.
as
So we
well.
have Peter
Yeah.
to blame.
Oh, Peter's yeah, he's a crappy. person in
I did not know this. Oh my
Yeah.
gosh. Wow. I'm
Yeah.
so enlightened.
So there's only the 4 books of the Bible that actually are Jesus' story and what he said and did. And
There's
obviously,
only 4 what of the Bible?
books.
Books of
Yeah.
the Bible.
Yeah. Where it's Jesus' story. So there's like the Old Testament. Yeah.
Okay.
Old
Like a
Testament,
full
New
book.
Testament. Yeah. So it's like the Old Testament Bible, the New Testament Bible, the New Testament's everything from Jesus past that, but only 4 of I can't remember how many books there are.
I don't know.
Dozen or whatever. And in the New Testament, only 4 of them are Jesus's actual life. And then everything is like what his followers are doing after that and their interpretation of his message.
Do we know much about Peter? Like, was he trying to like control people, like get power or something? Or like, is this a theme in Christianity where like people are trying to claim power? I mean, I'm guessing that's kind of how I understand it.
I think that what people don't really understand about Christianity is a lot of what Jesus said was very radical and like flipping things on their head, like a lot. Like even just having women as disciples, like they weren't the official disciples, but like Mary Magdalene followed him around, and even like him talking to the woman at the well, like there's these stories of him talking to this woman in public that was unmarried. That's just, even that in and of itself was like radical at the time. So like we don't always interpret Jesus and what Jesus said, if you believe Jesus is real, like that's up to you, as a historical figure or religious figure. We don't always interpret it in the context of the culture at the time. We interpret it in the context of our own culture, and we take verses, like, I mean, if you talk about homosexuality, we take verses that we want to take, and because I think very much it's like we decide as like North America decided a couple hundred years ago that like, oh, homosexuality is wrong.
Yeah.
And then I'm going to take
where did
verses
that even
from
come
the Bible.
from?
I'm not sure where it originated, but like we took verses from the Bible and it's like, oh, well, the Bible proves here, rather than reading the Bible and deciding it from that lens. So that's kind of part of the reason, obviously, why I walked away from religion, is because I actually went to Bible college and learned this and learned how out of context the Bible is. And I actually read the parts of the Bible that I had been told these stories my whole life. And it was like, oh, this is kind of different than what I feel like I was taught, or like these things are taken out of context, or like this God in the Old Testament is just like killing everyone all the time. Like, is this like a loving God that I want to worship? Like, I don't know. Like,
yeah, that's what's so interesting, I think, about society in general, is like it's all up to interpretation, right? Like, even I had a conversation with someone today about Kanye just posted a photo of on the back of his shirt. Did you see this? So he put White Lives Matter on the back of that, and like, now I'm kind of a fan of Kanye, and like I kind of get like what he's doing and such, but like I think the average person wouldn't really get it, and therefore like now start defending White Lives Matter because Kanye said it and a Black man said it, so therefore I can say it, or whatever. And it's just like, okay, that's extremely dangerous. And like the people who just like start interpreting things that way, as opposed to like, I don't know, the bigger message here, or like what is actually love, because so that's my, like, Islam is a big thing on this. Like I had an ex who was Muslim, and he always used to say like Islam has really bad PR and like Jews have good PR, and like I really feel like that's true. Like Islam has really bad PR, but it's a beautiful culture and a beautiful, like, a whole religion even, that I experienced personally in the Middle East. And Judaism is beautiful in ways too, but it is fucked in other ways too, right? Like, I think everything like is fucked and beautiful. So, and sometimes, fucked makes it beautiful, right? So that's what's so interesting. That the main message of Jesus is love, right? Like, and like, I have this one friend, and he's as gay as it gets, and he's super religious, and oh my gosh, it's so funny. He like put a Jesus on his door that he spray painted it silver and put it on his bedroom door. And I was like, I don't think you're gonna be able to bring many guys over and walk through that door. So like, I think we need to move to Jesus. Just some advice from me. But like to him, he's like, no, Jesus loves me. Like it's just like simple, and Jesus is love, and Jesus loves him, and it's perfect, but a lot of people are shamed through religion, right?
Mhm.
Because they think Jesus won't love me unless I do it this way, unless I do the way Peter told me, or something
Yeah.
like this. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's how you kind of feel about it?
Yeah, for sure. And I think like, unfortunately, like going back to culture, it's like we're just, it's like a lot of white men that kind of
Mm-hmm.
decided that they were going to start, publishing books and magazines about like whatever it is, like speaking on purity culture, just kind of being
Mm-hmm.
like this idea of like you shouldn't date until like you're really serious about the person or whatever it is that's kind of like harmful. Like it doesn't say anywhere in the Bible that you can't date, but
Yeah.
taking these kind of messages and making them more extreme and then like commercializing them in a way. And yeah, even going back to how you said you were kind of raised, it's like there is this kind of North American cultural thing of like you're either a slut or you're a prude.
Yeah.
And like there's not a lot of in between, especially for women, especially if you're a teenager,
Yeah.
unfortunately. And I hope that it's changing now, but like when we grew up, that's very much what it was. Um,
Yeah. Yeah, I had to really claim the word slut, and I still do, because like it is my clap back, because
yeah.
like I got to do whatever I wanted. And I had to really fight to do whatever I wanted too. Yeah. And then so we briefly touched on like homosexuality and such. So
Yeah.
I'm curious like how homoerotic it was. Like, like all the men are split up from the women, and like,
Yeah.
um and something so interesting was in the Middle East was homosexuality. Now, I'm not speaking for everyone, I'm not speaking for every case, but in general, the culture is like homosexuality just like doesn't really exist.
Hmm.
So a lot of people will marry to have babies, but still have homosexual relationship outside of that, because it's just like normal. Like one of my best stories is I was in Bethlehem, like literally like feet from where Jesus was born. And I was staying on this like permaculture farm. And there was this guy who was British and a bit older, and he had this young Palestinian boyfriend who would hang out on the farm. And this one time, like I went into the room like to get my stuff or something, and it was kind of a dorm room situation. And this, I forget what his name was, but he came in the room and he's like, do you want a massage? And I was like, no, like, no. And then he's like, come on, like, I'll give you a massage. And I was like, no, I have a boyfriend. And he's like, so what? I have a boyfriend. And I was like, wait, like, isn't like, if not, like, you're supposed to respect my like monogamy, or like respect that like you're gay, and what, like, but like they just see it in a totally different way, and I think
Hmm.
Western culture is where it really like pounds the like labels. And I mean, that's why I use the label queer, because it's the least label. Like I was even
Yeah.
having a conversation about gender today, and I was like, how do I really feel about my pronouns? Like I don't really want to be labeled as gender all the time. Like sometimes I feel
Yeah.
like this, sometimes that. But I find like religion specifically like really harps on like gender as the construct, and
Yeah.
monogamy and heterosexuality. But we are humans and we have these impulses beyond those things. So how did you experience that in your youth? How did it kind of play in?
Well, it's so interesting when you were talking about that. It made me think of how we are so focused on the sexual side of things that it's like we
Mm-hmm.
don't want kids to be sexual, that we kind of end up sexualizing everything.
Totally.
Like, I had
Gender
one friend.
reveals.
Yeah, well, I had one friend who he went and did like a missions trip kind of thing, and when he was like 19 or something, and
Mm.
he came back and then he just like refused to hug me. Like we used to like hug and sometimes cuddle and stuff like
Hmm.
that, but it was like the idea of hugging a woman, someone of the opposite gender as him, he's like a man, um, like was like a no-no, because like your boobs would be like pressed up against his body and that's like too tempting or too much. So it's like overly sexualizing these things that don't need to be sexualized. So he would only give me
Totally.
side hugs. And to this day, it's like kind of triggering to me to like someone, because I had an ex who would sometimes like give me side hugs. I was like, don't
Y-
side hug me. Like it makes me uncomfortable because it's like,
Yeah.
are you uncomfortable with the idea of touching me so much that you want to give me a side hug instead? Like,
Or just
I don't
don't
know.
touch me, like create a boundary,
Yeah. And so it was just like, I don't know. It was just really weird. Yeah. Like you couldn't be overly touchy feely with your friends necessarily. I don't, I mean, still to this day, I'm sometimes uncomfortable with hugs because I want to be touchy feely and huggy towards people, but I don't know if
Mm,
they're uncomfortable. So then I don't initiate
mm.
hugs, things like that. Like, because I just assumed that like people, I just was raised like really not touchy feely. And yeah, it's just interesting that in an attempt to make things less
Not
sexual, you
sexual.
somehow make it more sexual.
Yeah. Yeah. Interesting.
um,
Yeah, because
yeah,
I found out I found I had kind of a more neutral experience. So then I was just free to kind of explore on my own, as
yeah,
opposed to like this hyper, like, don't do it. And then that's
yeah,
what, like, I remember I had this friend who, like, their dad gave the advice around drugs, like, okay, if you're gonna do drugs, like, just do half of what your friends did. And then if you're not
right.
having a good time, add a little more, like, and it took the like kind of fun out of it, so it's like you're
Yeah,
less like tempted to do this forbidden
yeah.
thing, right?
What's interesting when you actually look at like the statistics of like what age teenagers start having sex, or people, like usually it's like however whatever the age is, 17 or something like that, I think it is. um People who are raised in the church and more purity culture, or who decided to like sign these things saying I'm not going to have sex till I'm married, they're only having sex like 6 months later than the average.
Wow.
It's not that much of a difference. It's not like there's
Wow.
this like crazy 3 to 5 year difference. It's just like
They only held
six
on like
months
an
later.
extra 6 months.
Yeah, exactly. And that's like I another kind of reason where I was starting to feel like in my own personal journey that I was just like, oh, this whole like sex waiting till your marriage thing is kind of bullshit. It was when um one of my like good childhood family friends, like they had kids that were all like the same age of like me and my siblings. So it was like the daughter that was the same age as my sister, she ended up getting pregnant like before she was married, when she was, I don't know, early 20s. And her
Mm,
mom was just like, well, unfortunately, like so and so's pregnant. And I remember feeling like how sad for her that her mom is saying, oh, unfortunately, I'm going to have my
mm,
first grandchild. Like, unfortunately, this my daughter's
mm.
pregnant. Like, I felt really like in that moment being like, that is really unfortunate that you're so strongly averse to the fact that your daughter had sex and got
Yeah,
pregnant. But also she probably got pregnant because she didn't know anything about birth control or condoms.
100%. a hundred
Um,
percent.
like all these things. And also statistically, you're way more likely to get an STI than you are to get pregnant. So like that's kind of like where we are so worried about, you know, teen pregnancy and things like that, when really we should be worried about the fact that we're not learning about condoms and then getting STIs at a young age, you know?
Seriously.
Yeah.
Yeah. So again, going back to the homosexuality part of it, like
Yeah.
how else did it play out kind of in your youth? Were people expressing tendencies, or did you witness anything, or was it just like no, and then like maybe people came out as gay later that and like, do you know anything about their process, or what's your process with that? I'd love to
So,
hear.
yeah. So it was very much like, I don't know, like we don't talk about it kind of thing. Like,
And it
so,
was a thing. Like they talked about
so,
homosexuality as like it's not allowed.
um, yeah, in the sense that like it exists, but and you can like maybe you're even allowed to have those feelings, but you can't act upon them, you know. At
Mm,
least that's kind of more so what I was taught, that like, because I grew up being a teenager very much when at the height of like the same-sex marriage debate in Canada, where like, should this be a thing? Should it be legal? And my
mhm,
stance at the time was just like, why are we preventing people from doing whatever they want? Like,
mhm.
just because I'm religious doesn't mean other people are. So like, why are we, you know, preventing them from it? Um, yeah. So I had a lot of people come up to me and ask me like if my best friend was gay. So my best friend was a guy. Um, and yeah, it was kind of weird because it was just kind of like, oh, do you think he is
Oh, I
stuff like
know. That was
that?
the same
And I was
same
just
thing with
like,
me.
And
Same
part of
with
me
my
was
best
like,
friend.
oh, I'm like, well, if he is, he'll probably tell me or whatever.
Yeah,
It
yeah.
ended up being a really messy situation because when I was in my 20s, I think we like got drunk and I was just like, oh, you're probably gay. And it's just like, yeah, I am actually. And I was just like, oh my God, are you just coming out to me right now? Like, it was just this really weird thing.
I had a similar thing. My best
Yeah,
friend was totally gay, and then he started
yeah,
telling other people and not me. And then like people would
yeah,
ask me, and it was just like, why didn't he tell me? Like, yeah.
yeah. It was a
But it's
similar
not
thing where
about
he
me. I
literally
get it,
told,
but
yeah, yeah.
yeah.
So, but I think there is this kind of like, I don't know, fear around like telling some of your closest friends, especially if you know if they're really religious or you don't know
Yeah.
how they're going to react. Because at
And
the
you don't want to
time,
you don't want
yeah,
to tender anything you have with them. There's such a special relationship.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Because at the time, coming out was still like
A big deal.
a big deal, a kind of a scary thing for some people, especially if you don't know if you're safe in the context of like the city I grew up in. Like
Totally.
the like gay was still very much like insult,
Yeah, it was
junior high
for
school,
in
like being
Calgary,
like,
it
oh,
was
that's
for
so
sure.
gay, like whatever. Like it's, I hope teens aren't doing that now, but I don't really know.
Yeah.
Um,
And
so
like another big thing for us was like, if you come out as gay, you cannot be anything else. So you better be fucking sure you're gay. Because I had friends who came out as gay and then wanted to like be bi and whatever else. And they lost all their gay friends. And it was just this whole thing. Lesbians and
mm,
gay men, I both had that experience. Like I had this one gay friend and he was like, I really want to have an experience with a woman, but I'm so scared because like I have to be gay. Like I'm gay apparently. Like
yeah,
you have to like attach to this label so tightly.
that is really interesting because basically the same thing happened with my friend where he came out as
Mm,
gay, and then a few years later he was like, oh, I'm actually more bi.
And bi was like
Yeah,
bi's only now I feel like getting its like heyday because before
yeah,
it was so shit on and like I
yeah,
remember I had this one friend who was bi and like everyone would be telling everyone else like, oh no, he's only with girls or he's only with guys. I'm like, who cares? Like he can be
yeah.
with both. Like, yeah.
Yeah, I wonder if that's like part of me is like wonders when I'm talking about these things, like how much of it was like a rural Alberta kind of cultural
Mm,
experience I had, and how much of it was religion, and you know, had I been raised in the city, how my views on those things would change. So, um, but yeah, for my own kind of process in that, like discovering my sexuality, it was very. I remember this moment where someone was talking about um like boobs and talking about like it was like a, I can't remember who was there. It was like probably a bunch of like girlfriends of mine, like friends that are women. And they're like, I don't really get the thing with boobs. Like, why do guys like boobs? Like, what is it about boobs? And I remember being like, I get it. Like, and at the time, I didn't really think like that's a really queer thing to say or think to myself. But I was like, yeah, I get it. Boobs are nice. Like, you know,
yeah. I mean, how do they
like
not get it? Like, what the fuck?
they just like didn't get it. And then eventually I learned more about the Kinsey scale and things like that. And I heard the words like bi-curious
Mm,
and heteroflexible. And then I'm like, okay,
mm,
yeah, like this sounds like something I am, like bi-curious. But yeah, going back to kind of the way I was raised, like even though I was starting to feel like more like I was either willing to be more sexually liberal or eventually I did have sex with someone who I wasn't married to. Spoiler alert. Um, I was still very much like, oh, I'll probably still like it still felt like it's a pretty sacred thing. And I was like, oh, I'll probably only ever have sex with someone I'm in a relationship with. And I don't
mm,
ever like see myself being in a relationship with a woman. So like
mm,
there's no point in like labeling myself as bisexual or queer or any of these things because I just thought like, oh, I'll just only ever be with men and I'll only have sex in the context of like a relationship. Eventually that did change and I just started
mm.
having sex with people that I wasn't in a relationship with. Um, and then I had to kind of come to terms with the fact that like, do you like I learned, you know, what heteronormativity was and this idea of like yeah, kind of I don't know what it's called, but it's kind of like have you heard of like the lesbian master document where
I don't think so.
it's like this thing you can find online, so it's kind of like
Oh my God,
you
I
can
need to Google this right now. The
figure out it's
lesbian.
master document. It's like kind of so like you can figure out if you're queer, but it's how um Yes, I heard of this, and
Oh, I see here.
yeah.
Okay. I'll look it
Um,
up later.
yeah. And then I realized like, oh, am I actually not wanting to be in a relationship with a woman, or am I just like, or this was just how I was raised, more like heterosexuality is the norm, and I feel more comfortable with men and with the idea of being in a relationship with a
Totally.
man because that's how I was raised. And am I like just too ashamed of like telling my family or my friends that I'm with a woman or whatever it is?
Totally.
And then once I actually realized like, no, maybe I actually would date a woman, then I felt more comfortable with the idea of actually like, like labeling myself as bisexual and like thinking about the more sexual side of being with women. So,
Mm-hmm.
but it was
Yeah.
definitely like a longer process than probably some people experience because of the way I was raised. So
Yeah. Yeah. I feel like it's, I mean, especially too, because like it was more complicated to be bi than one or the other,
yeah,
and or like pan or whatever else. And yeah, so I mean, my experience was that, yeah, it's I mean, it's still kind of hard to be bi because like I find the male experiences I have are so easy. Like even when I'm on like
mhm,
online dating or whatever, or go to a
yeah,
club or whatever, even when I'm in a fucking gay club with all gay men, like, you know, the one hetero guy that is there trying to find you, and
yeah,
it's just like way too easy. Like it's too easy. And
yeah,
I find like women are still so shamed, and vulva bodied beings like are still so shamed, and like other genders as well, I find, like especially other genders, I would say, because they, you know, are even more shamed than women, and
yeah,
they are told they don't exist, and they told they don't deserve love, and when they do try to get in relationships, it's so scary because someone could totally reject who you are. And yeah, it's just like I find it so difficult because you have to like really nurture them hard. And like I live a
mhm,
nomadic life, and like I'm pretty like I like to go deep and fast, fast, fast and deep. And it's hard to do that. You have to
yeah,
really nurture them. And you know, I'm more into the kind of like playing quickly. And yeah, that's why I'm excited to like go to Berlin and play with that, because the culture is quite different there.
yeah. I've heard that.
So I'm going to be very curious about exploring that. But yeah, I know you mean, even now, like even like some people kind of in my family, like they still always assume that I'm hetero because I mostly talk about experiences when I'm with men, because
Mhm,
my female experiences are a lot less, and so it like devalues you and your queerness, and it's really
mhm.
difficult in general, I think. And yeah, I think religion can play a huge role in that, but I think religion and culture, right, like that's where it really kind
Yeah,
of all swarms together, and then Fox News and whatever else.
yeah.
Yeah.
And I hope that these things are changing. Like, I don't pay as much attention to Christian culture now.
Hmm.
Unfortunately, I think there's a lot more white ring steeped Trumpism in
Yeah,
religion in
this
the
is huge
States,
now.
especially. But
Yeah.
also, I see a lot more like, um, yeah, like queer affirming churches. And it's really interesting that some of the musicians I grew up with have now come out as gay or
Hmm.
lesbian,
Hmm.
or even they've even the guy who wrote the book on purity culture, basically it's called I Kiss Dating Goodbye. He's a lot of this stuff really
Wow.
problematic, and it's not that he's like completely progressive necessarily, but he has like realized that a lot of the stuff he taught is troublesome in a lot of ways, because
Wow.
like you said, it is very much the patriarchy and
Yeah.
a lot of these other kind of influences that went into this um, in the past. And I'm really glad to see that some people are kind of evolving past that, and some of them are still holding on to their religion, some aren't. And it's like, if that serves a purpose for you, like good for you. I think that like I'm not anti-religion, but if it is
Hmm.
doing harm to others, then I see that as a problem. And
That's how
oftentimes,
I feel about it.
yeah, and
Yeah,
oftentimes Christianity has harmed queer people. So that's
totally.
kind of why I would personally not really like go back to church or call myself a Christian anyway.
Hmm.
Um, but like you said, your gay friend with like the Jesus, like if that serves them in their life, like good
Yeah.
for you. Like
Yeah.
if you know.
Yeah, Rob's very into God. Yeah, even like that, I watched that documentary Pray Away the Gay, and they said like a lot of them you know, who like started it all or were just gay, right? And like in shame,
Yeah.
right? So
Yeah.
yeah. Yeah,
And
so yeah.
oh, I was just gonna say, yeah, conversion therapy is like a whole nother
Yeah, that's fucked.
topic of
Yeah.
horrible. Yeah.
If you're listening to this and you went through conversion therapy, please come on my podcast. I would love to hear this.
Mm.
Yeah, so just touching on like kind of the topic of today is so sovereignty. Is there anything else you want to say about like going from purity to sovereignty? Like what does sovereignty mean to you, and this kind of flip that's happened in your life?
Um, yeah, for me it was kind of just like letting go of these things that I was taught and kind of just making my own choices as an adult. Like it didn't feel necessarily like this huge deep thing the way that some people experience. Like I've heard a lot of people now close to my age go through this thing they call deconstruction. So it's kind of like deconstructing your religious upbringing. And I don't feel
Mm,
like I went through that in some ways. It was just like I said, I was slowly seeing kind of like behind the curtain in a way of like
mm,
how hypocritical Christianity was and how shame based that I was just like, I don't. And the last time I remember going to church in a more serious way, not like going with my parents at Christmas or whatever, the last time I tried to go to church on my own, I was really just looking for community,
mm-hmm,
and that's really what I wanted to stay in church for, even though I was
totally.
like, I don't know if I believe all this stuff anymore. And I went, and the pastor spoke on purity and being like same-sex marriage, blah blah blah, and I was just like,
No.
I don't want to. Like, I don't think I believe this anymore. And I was feeling really shamed and really bad about myself.
Mm,
And I'm just like, I don't need this in my life where I'm feeling badly about myself. Like, it's not serving me anymore. And I wasn't even
mhm.
finding the community that I was looking for. So that's like the last time I went to church and just kind of like walked away from it. And it was just one of those things for me. It's just like, I just feel like I want to do this. Like, obviously, I'm a human being with sexual urges that are very natural.
Yeah.
So I was just like, I have these feelings and I feel like I want to do this. And I'm just like had sex, you know, with someone who I was with at the time. I had a good experience. I had an orgasm my very first time that I had penetrative like sex with a man. So it was just
Mm,
like, oh, this feels good. Like I want to keep doing this. Like this is like such a big part of life in some ways. So it's like, why am I kind of like holding back from this and like everyone else is having sex? Like,
yeah,
um,
yeah. And
so
even going beyond that, like
yeah.
your exploration, would you say it keeps expanding, or would you say you're,
Yeah,
yeah.
absolutely. Like I said, like when I first started having sex, I was kind of like, well, you know, I would like to maybe keep it to like, I'm in love with this person or we're in a relationship or whatever. And then I just like kind of almost like accidentally in a way, like came across these opportunities to like kind of be slutty. And I was just like, yeah, I might as well like like do this, whatever. Just like oftentimes it was when I was traveling and like
Mm-hmm.
sometimes like most of the time there was alcohol involved, which, you know,
Yeah.
that's a whole other thing. But I
Yeah.
felt like really just like it empowered me in the sense of like to take control of my own sexuality and to take, yeah, and like that's not something I ever
Mm,
felt like I can control. So just like choosing to do it and choosing to go home with strangers,
mm-hmm.
like like even if the sex wasn't that great, I had some really cool stories about it, you
Yeah.
know.
Yeah. This is my life.
So, yeah, exactly. I know you have lots of stories. So
But sorry, can you repeat that again? It empowered me to take control of my own sexuality. Is that what you were saying?
yeah, it
Yeah.
empowered me to take control of my own sexuality. So it was very much like I'm choosing to do this. I'm choosing to kind
Mm,
of let go of my inhibitions and
mm,
have these experiences and just be a sexual person because that was something that was so repressed in myself for
wow.
so long. And even just like I said, the whole thing with masturbating and not like looking at my body, like just feeling this kind of disconnection to my body as well, whether it's my breasts or other parts of my body, that I'm like,
Mm-hmm.
oh, this was so shamed and so covered up for so long because I felt like I couldn't show this or whatever it is. And now it's like, oh, I'm just going to wear whatever and not worry about if I'm showing too much cleavage, because like, who cares? Like, it's my
Yeah.
body. If you have a problem with it, then that's kind of your problem, not mine. Like,
Mm-hmm.
I'm in charge of my own body and how I dress and what I do with it,
And you're
so
in charge of your thoughts and your
exactly,
shit. Yeah.
exactly. And it's not on me to make sure that like I'm making you comfortable, whatever it is. And some of it probably did come from like learning more about like even rape culture and things like that. Like, what you wear does not determine whether or not your sexual assault was justified. So it's the same
Totally. Oh my
with,
God.
it's kind of just like an extension of that in some ways with purity culture. It's like what you're wearing should
Yeah.
not determine whether or
Oh,
not you are
purity culture is
sexualized.
totally a part of rape culture. Like it
Yeah,
goes hand in hand. It like
absolutely.
it feeds rape culture.
Yeah, and it was actually like I said, some of these people that was following that were kind of religious but kind of moving out of religion. Like,
Mm.
remember blogs were a huge thing back in like maybe it
Yeah.
was 2005, and I just
Yeah.
happened to find like Twitter and these blogs of like some of these women who were kind of like learning more about sex because they were actually like getting married
Mm.
and like talk. And that's the thing too. It's like talking about sex wasn't necessarily bad if you were talking about it in the context of being married. Like, there were books that were Christian based that were about like sex and things like that.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so yeah, I just found these like women who were talking about sex and talking about how they were so disempowered in their own bodies. And oftentimes women struggle with like not having orgasms or not even
Yeah.
feeling like they can be sexual with their partner because they were told sex is bad for so long, that once
Yeah.
they actually got married and it wasn't like this light switch they could turn on.
Yeah.
So it's almost like I learned about that negative side of purity culture before I was even at the point of having sex, that I was kind of like, oh, why, again, like, why would I choose this if I'm just going to end up being married and being like not able to have good sex because
Yeah.
of all these messages I'm taught. So I'm just like,
I know. And then it's like you're shamed because you didn't have enough sex. And
yeah,
then like it's like it's just you can't win.
yeah. And it is more, again, like the women has more responsibility. Like, the women should be a virgin, but it's okay if the guys have sex, more so. Like, I mean, obviously
Yeah.
there's still
Yeah.
messages to men to be pure, but it was like
Totally.
more acceptable for men to be
Totally. And
sexual.
then, when you do have sex, it's not about you. It's about the man,
Yeah,
you know?
absolutely.
Yeah.
Um,
Totally.
and
So,
so,
mhm.
oh, I was just gonna say, yeah. So I just like, I'm glad that I like learned to masturbate and all this stuff before I ever had sex, because I was learning
Yeah.
my own pleasure and what that
Yeah.
actually was like, and
If
things
you
like
can't
that.
fuck yourself, how the hell are you gonna fuck someone else? Honestly, honestly. It's
Yeah.
my main advice to anyone. Learn to fuck yourself. um, so yeah, I'm just looking at my other main questions here. So what there, I guess these two kind of tie in together. Like, what's your
Mhm.
definition of orgasm? Maybe what was it and what is it now? And what was your first orgasm, if you can remember? You kind of touched on that a little bit, but
Yeah. So I think when I was like reflecting on this and like, yeah, learning about it, it was very much this idea of like, an orgasm is like, oh, well, you'll know it when it happens. And
yeah,
I'm
don't get
just
me
like,
started on
and
that
that felt
one.
like so much pressure when I was like
Mm-hmm.
trying to learn how to masturbate. Like I said, I was like looking at myself in the mirror, being like, okay, well, like, how do I know if I've had one?
Yeah,
And
yeah.
or this idea of like, oh, it feels like a sneeze between your legs or something. And so it was kind of like, yeah, this more like self pressure, being like, have I had one? Did I have one? I don't know. And then I
Mm.
think eventually I did, just for masturbating, but I don't necessarily have any like big revelatory
So
like
what's your definition of
memories
one
of
though?
it. Um, yeah, this is like hard for me because I mean,
Mm-hmm.
I probably would have had the more traditional, I like kind of definition of this like release, or this big,
Yeah.
sexual release, until I like, met you and you were talking more about it. I'm like, yeah, what is an orgasm? Like, what is like sometimes I don't think about the definitions of things. Like even I was having a chat with someone I met on a dating app the other day, and he's just like, "What's your definition of slutty?" I'm like, "That's a good question.
Yeah,
I'll have to think
that's a
about
great
that."
question.
Yeah.
Because we get to choose. Like, this is my
Exactly.
point.
Yeah.
We get to choose. So I'm curious,
Yeah.
like, how do you choose your pleasure and explosion of pleasure?
Yeah. So I probably would more so like lean in towards thinking of like this clitoral kind of like
Mm-hmm.
orgasm release kind of like the more, yeah, traditional, like you sexual, whatever that's called. We go up sexually.
Peak
Peak.
or
Yeah.
yeah.
But I also know that like, I know I've had other types of orgasms besides
Mm,
that. Like I've
mm,
had an orgasm with a partner that was just like breast stimulation.
mm.
Um, yeah, and I recently had one that was more just like an energetic kind of experience, being like, I am so much in pleasure right now that like
Fuck yeah.
this feels like such an amazing moment that
Mm-hmm.
like to me that was an orgasm. Um,
Mm-hmm.
but yeah, I probably wouldn't have really thought of it too much um like that before because yeah, I mean I wasn't really taught much about pleasure when I was younger. So I've kind of had to like learn these things for myself. And unfortunately, because of the way I was raised, it is hard for me to vocalize in sexual experiences, especially with
Mm-hmm.
men, kind of what I
Mm-hmm.
want or what I don't want. And I've had some experiences where I've tried to tell them and they're not really listening,
Yeah,
unfortunately.
I've heard those.
So, yeah. So it's kind of like I've had really good sexual experiences, but also I know that like these things can expand and be better,
Yeah, there's a lot of
be
trial and
more.
error. Like, that's really what it comes
Yeah,
down to.
absolutely. And I haven't had too many times in my life where I've had a long-term partner to actually like explore
Yeah,
certain things with. So to me, that's kind of like the unfortunate part about,
I feel that too.
yeah,
Yeah,
wishing that there was a more like long-term person who I can trust and
yeah,
be with. Because like, yeah, one night stands or casual sex can be great for different reasons, but they don't
yeah.
necessarily give you the same thing, I
Like
think.
safe, like, yeah, cultivation and yeah.
Yeah.
Oh my God, my words are bad today. Cumulative.
Yeah.
Yeah. So to kind of start finishing off here, I would love if you wanted to do just a quick little embodiment and talk to your orgasm, if that feels good to you.
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I invite you, if anyone wants to go along with this, they're welcome. I invite you, Rachel, if you want to either shut down your eyes completely or just lower your gaze. Just taking a few deep breaths into your body. Each breath kind of reaches deeper into your torso. And eventually the breath reaches deep down, maybe even into your root chakra. And just calling in the oracle of your orgasm, the energy of your orgasm, and taking a moment to see if it has anything to tell you. So just take a moment in silence here. And then whenever you're ready, maybe it says nothing, but just take a few moments. Any messages, anything your orgasm has to tell you?
For me, I feel like it was just saying like more. Like I want, yeah, like more pleasure, more orgasms more. Yeah.
And did it have any details on how to claim more?
Um, I do just like love this idea about expanding and just exploring and figuring out different ways to like pleasure, like what pleasure looks like. Cause yeah, just exploration.
Amazing.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's really beautiful to see people who kind of overcome our childhood and our culture and are a part of shifting it, and it plays into the collective. It really does. And yeah, I mean, I'm all about the exploration, so I love that. I can't wait to hear more. And is there anything else you want to claim or speak about in this moment, or do you feel content?
I feel like we've touched on a lot, so I'm feeling pretty good.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Rachel. Do you want to plug your business or anything?
Yeah, I hadn't thought about that, but yeah, I'm a doula in Vancouver. I specialize in postpartum work, so yeah, very different kind of space in life as far as orgasm
Hey,
and birth and
birth is
pleasure.
God's
So
work here.
yeah. So yeah, that's what I do in
And you can
Vancouver.
find you on Instagram.
Yeah, so I'm Wildwood Doula on Instagram.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Rachel. It's been such a great learning experience, and such a cool topic, really. And I love all the parallels that we had.
Yeah.
And yeah, well, Rachel is an incredible doula, so you can always hit me up too, and I can send you her contact. And thank you so much for being here. So much love. And yeah, in the name of Jesus, keep it going.
Jesus
Or
wants you
Mary.
to have orgasms.
Yes, that's for sure what your orgasm said. And people are really into Mary Magdalene in my community lately too. This is like a big thing right now. So
yeah, there's a book that I've been meaning to read about like the rosary and the parallels with, I don't know.
Interesting.
I don't know. Modern feminism. I don't know what it's really about, but anyways.
And religion is the ultimate kink, if you ask me. So
Oh yeah. I mean, it's very interesting. I feel like I have to go back and reread the Bible now that I'm older. I mean, like,
yeah,
here?
that would be fun to do. Yeah. Awesome. Okay, well, thank you so much. Mwah, so much love.
You're welcome.